So Dave, let me guess, you didn't really have a good ending written for this series. Over an hour of rambling analysis and 2 entire videos excoriating other content creators, and you still don't know how to end it?
So, we're doing another intervention? I had an ending written for this series, and I was getting to it if you hadn't interrupted.
An ending? Is that what you were going for? I didn't hear anything of the sort. I heard you get back on your usual hobby horses. Please Dave, spare us the exercise in redundancy. No one wants to hear another lecture about modernity or decadence.
So what, are you quality control on my channel now?
No, I am just a representation of your own attempt to keep yourself honest. I thought we had been through this, Dave. What were you expecting?
I don't know. Considering that this fake Socratic dialogue question and answer format is more or less ripped off from ContraPoints, I was hoping you might lob me some softballs. Make me look good for once.
Well, Dave, this is your channel. I guess it makes sense that your alter ego is a reflection of your own self-loathing, just as ContraPoint's alter ego is a reflection of their narcissism. Besides, no one wants to see you in a costume.
That's for sure.
But all of this is neither here nor there. This conversation is about being direct and honest with your audience.
So what? Am I being dishonest now?
Not the way I would put it exactly. What I would say is that I am intercepting your own attempt to externalize the problems and revert to easy answers. Analysis is all well and good, Dave, but your audience deserves better. Your audience deserves direct and honest answers. Let's start with what's missing in your video.
And what's that?
Yourself.
Now that's pretty narcissistic, isn't it? This video is about the eras of YouTube, the big influencers, the people who change things. I'm certainly not among them. I certainly didn't have a large impact on how the dialogue on political YouTube went. Are you expecting a 20-minute video on just how influential I've been?
Not really, just perspective. You may not have influenced YouTube, but YouTube influenced you.
Have I ever claimed it hasn't?
Not directly, Dave, but I couldn't help but notice in your video you were careful to present 2 phenomena with ostensibly no influence on your worldview. You can present yourself in this video, like all YouTubers, as an unmovable font of wisdom, an unchangeable point of sanity in a sea of madness. More of the same internet bullshit.
Well, there is a format to follow, after all.
Perhaps, but it's a highly deceptive one. Everyone is sharing what they think. No one is sharing what they have been wrong about, where their own experiences broke from the narrative itself. You started this video saying that you were never a fan of ContraPoints or Dr. Jordan Peterson, but I am afraid that this is true only in the strictest sense. You may not have been interested in those figures directly, but you have definitely helped yourself to their Kool-Aid in the past. There is a story there, Dave.
And what story is that?
A story that might shed some light on the reason why you feel compelled to watch every leftist train wreck that slithers out of BreadTube, but still regard moderate conservative voices with an aversion typically reserved for boils on the backs of leprous war criminals.
That's a bit hyperbolic.
But it gets at a core truth, Dave. You have a past with these ideas, and that past has influenced your perspective on the current state of political YouTube.
Well, there's some truth to that, but I've been more or less honest about my past as a progressive, about my past as an atheist. When I first started examining philosophy and philosophical ideas, I was in the center of modernity, of libertine culture that really held up personal pleasure as the highest form of fulfillment, and there didn't seem to be anything wrong with that. I found people that more or less confirmed that worldview. One I mentioned was Dan Savage, which it seems to me now in hindsight is very much the earlier iteration of ContraPoints. You know, in 2006, it seemed like Dan Savage had all of the answers. Any objection you might have to the modern view of relationships and sex could be answered by him. He was the big sex advice columnist in Seattle, and he seemed to be somewhat of a guru. He made the big chaotic mess that was the relations between men and women in the early 2000s all seem to make sense and gel at the end of the day. And it was easy. It was exactly what someone in their early 20s wanted to hear. All you had to do is not be an asshole, be reasonably generous, be reasonably conscientious, and then just make sure that consent was always obtained. And with that in place, the sky was the limit, at least insofar as it came to seeking your own pleasure. But then life happens, things start accumulating, problems occur that can't quite be dealt with the Dan Savage worldview. And you want more, you want meaning and truth and some direction your life can take that isn't entirely subjective. Eventually you have to look for something else. You have to walk away, because otherwise you're going to go insane. You're going to become a broken person, or at least a narcissist. And I realized that. In the end, it wasn't enough. And I think the real final straw was when Dan Savage did the It Gets Better project, because it was strange. Initially, people like Dan Savage and other people in his circle were radical. They were the people carrying forth the message of self-liberation and self-fulfillment. But then it seemed like they began apologizing for the status quo. They began telling people that the way things are is all right. And I think the mask slipped. You could see that, really, Dan Savage and the rest of the people that promoted progressive modernity were the people who were invested in how things were. This was their world. And at some point I had to reject it.
A very good story, and one that I think a lot of millennials would share. You tried accepting what the modern world had to offer, but then you moved. But where are you now? Where have you landed? How do you describe your worldview?
Well, that's a large question. I don't know if I can answer it. I'm a right-winger, maybe a radical right-winger.
How millennial. You all started in a live and let live mode. Do your own thing. No labels. Reach across the aisle. Now the only thing that either side agrees on is their hatred for the moderates, their hatred for complacency and the status quo.
I suppose, maybe our generation is just screwed up. But more than that, it's experience. You live your life and things happen, and sooner or later you realize that you need more than just your own self-fulfillment to get you through, to make things make sense in the end. You need meaning.
That sounds wise, Dave. Almost like something that Jordan Peterson would say.
Perhaps, but I think that the young are a lot more delicate than the older generations usually give them credit for. Or maybe this is just millennials. Nevertheless, when you're young, you want to break the rules, but within bounds. You want to make sure that you're striking out in the right direction, in some direction that will actually bear fruit. And that has a sort of contradictory nature to it. You want a kind of non-radical radical, a kind of moderate form of rebellion. You'll break all the rules, for sure, but within certain boundaries. And for a lot of people, that combination is probably Jordan Peterson. He's an authority figure that breaks the rules, who strikes out in only one direction, but still provides a framework for a meaning that a lot of young people crave, that a lot of young people need.
So, Dave, did you find that kinds of radical moderate yourself when you left the Church of Progress? Perhaps a figure not unlike Jordan Peterson?
I suppose I did when I found Christianity. I really had to. When people talk about Christianity, they oftentimes don't describe it honestly. They put a kid face on it, they make it all seem happy, they make it seem easy to digest. But when you actually look at it, when you look at its propositions, when you actually read the Gospel, or really any book of the Bible, it's anything but that. It's radical, and not the kind of radical that's easy to digest, not the kind of radical that you're really looking for in your mid-20s. It's not like the radicalism of the 60s that you can sign up for and get a t-shirt. It's not the kind of sexy radicalism. It's scary, it's terrifying when you take it seriously. And for most people who approach Christianity, I think they need bridges. And for me, that bridge was John Paul II.
The people's pope.
I know it sounds crazy. John Paul II had been dead for more than a decade by the time I ever considered Christianity seriously, in an intellectual sense at least. But for me, John Paul II was an incredible influence. He was a larger-than-life character and really an essential stepping stone from anyone who was walking away from hedonism and really all aspects of modernity. There was something special in that figure for people who were trying to reconnect with an ancient faith, something that seemed entirely radical and different from anything you'd ever experienced before in your life. But inside John Paul II, there seemed to be an implicit promise that one could embrace and live out everything that was implied in that radical and ancient faith and still keep one's feet on the ground. You could turn your back on modernity and all that implied and still live a life as somebody, a modern person in the early 21st century.
Making peace with modernity? Calm now, Dave. You must have known that was a false promise.
Well, that's not it entirely. When someone comes to faith in their mid-20s, one instantly wants to sacrifice everything. One wants to go all the way in the name of what they've discovered, because you feel like you've gotten a hold of something unusual, something revolutionary, and you're all gung-ho to dedicate your life to the project. You think you can be the next Saint Benedict, the next Joan of Arc. You're ready to sacrifice everything to be a crusader. And then reality sets in. You're made aware of just what a backslider you are, just how weak you are. You're the same person you were when you converted, and that hasn't changed. And even if your faith does strengthen you, it doesn't make you the kind of person you have in your mind when you convert. And at the same time that you realize that you're not strong enough, you also fully take stock of what being radical for the faith would actually mean. Are you prepared to do all those things to separate yourself from modernity entirely? You want a middle way, a way that you can live and fight for your faith that won't totally destroy you, a way that allows you to live in modernity, a way that you can preserve yourself in your relationships with people who don't necessarily share in that faith tradition.
And so John Paul II was the middle way? The radical moderate?
I probably would have shirked if you had said that 3 years ago, but for me, John Paul II was a middle way. He was the middle way. He was the way to be Christian, to be Catholic in a modernity that was otherwise completely toxic. And you could see this in his moral witness. The entire man's life was a testament to this possibility. His work early, preaching against communism in Poland, and later, John Paul II's work bearing witness, full Orthodox Catholicism in the face of a modernity that rejected it, in the face of a modernity that wanted to call every one of its core tenets into question. And in the beginning of the 21st century, it seemed like the vision of John Paul II had won. Communism lay vanquished, and there seemed to be a new Catholic spirit. And I wasn't the only person seeing this. A lot of people were talking about a Catholic moment, a renaissance of religious thought, a new way of conceptualizing modernity and individuals' relationship to modernity. And John Paul II was the face of that. He was the essence of that. But now you look at where we are and none of it makes sense anymore.
The Catholic moment is gone.
There is still something left of the Catholic moment people were talking about, but it's not the same. It's not like it was before. It's a new West. It's a new America that exists right now. Things are different, and even the church is different. I started this channel talking about how the West had fundamentally changed, how things were different now, how the rules that had applied once were no longer going to continue into the future. But it wasn't until 2018 that I really even internalized this when it came to the Catholic Church itself. I think in a lot of ways Francis has changed things. There's a mood now that the Vatican not only doesn't want to confront modernity, it wants to cooperate with a lot of modernity's worst aspects. And that's been a bitter pill to swallow. You see how the church reacts to its own corruption and the corruption in some of modernity and modern culture's worst elements, and you just have to ask yourself, what's going on? How can this come from Christ's church on earth?
It sounds like your faith has been shaken, Dave.
My faith in God hasn't been shaken. I still believe in the same things I've always believed in. Christ, the sacraments, even the moral witness of the church. But again, I think it's different now. There's a difference between acknowledging the church's holy mission and then lying down in front of corruption when it comes from inside the church itself. I don't want to make the faithful victims of the corrupt just because they're aware of how the world actually works.
That's it. One bad pope, one institutional failure, and you immediately take a step back from the vicar of Christ. Come now, Dave. Haven't you read history? Or perhaps you didn't read the fine print when you signed up for the Catholicism thing. Some would say that this problem was rather predictable from a historical point of view. What is the difference between 2019 and 1519? 1019? 319?
But that's just the thing. There are always villains in the church, there was always corruption, but there were also people who pushed back against that, and they didn't always operate within the rules of the time. There were Peter Demians, there were Dante Alighieri's who pointed out the church's corruption and fought against it, and in doing so they ruffled a lot of feathers. But every one of them didn't obey the strict rules of the time. They thought outside of the box. They weren't complacent. And that's the problem these days, complacency. And more, it seems that the conservative element inside these institutions encourages that. It makes us all feel happy about where we are, but we really shouldn't be.
And is that where we come back to Jordan Peterson, Dave? You see him as the secular or Protestant version of John Paul II. Someone who, while being correct, and perhaps more healthy than the status quo, encourages complacency and folly.
I definitely see that parallel, but it's not just folly and it's not just complacency. We have to deal with real political problems, real corruption as they exist in the institutions that we're talking about right now. And that has to begin with an honest discussion of how political power actually works. And that seems to be something that no one really wants to take on. Everyone seems to be caught up in the claims, the moral vision that the institutions that speak for Western civilization make every day. And that holds us back.
And so you are here to disillusion people about the moral claims of our present civilization? How reactionary. But seriously, Dave, I think you are giving yourself too much credit for being original. The corruption in the Christian church, the decadence of civilization, the complacency of the status quo, it is much as it has been for 1,000 years at least.
I know that's the way things have always been, and I don't want to detract from people who have a moral message, who want to reassert the necessity of moral witness inside a corrupt world. But that also doesn't change things. It also doesn't excuse ignorance about how politics actually work. When I look at someone like Jordan Peterson and all of his followers, I can't help but feel frustrated, just with where everything is going. I know Jordan Peterson doesn't preach complacency, but everything he does and everything he represents seems to encourage that, seems to encourage things continuing on in their status quo mode, inside a corruption that I don't think is sustainable anymore. I mean, we all exist inside the context of a Christian civilization that in many ways has lost its spiritual core. That's not a survivable condition. We need radical change. And even if Jordan Peterson and Jordan Peterson's followers understand that at an intellectual level we need radical change, for some reason I don't think they're going to actually understand that at an emotional level. For those in our society, the Christian moral witness, in some implicit form, has been the air around us. It's been the background radiation of everything we say and do for the longest time, for all of our lives and all of the lives of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. But those same assumptions are going away, and we can't even see what we've lost. In many ways, it's like we're fish swimming around in water. We don't even know it's there. And as long as we are inside a bubble, something that keeps us inside that moral framework as background, as implicit, we'll never realize it's there. We'll never realize what's lost or what needs to be restored.
So Dave, you are making people aware of their dire circumstances. Do you want to set the world on fire, Dave? For someone who has been a critic of accelerationism, you seem to be selling their product, albeit with less autism. Honestly, Dave, perhaps you should have cast your lot with the proprietarians. At least they make the acceleration sound fun.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to wake it up. And at this point, there's nothing I can stand less than right-wing conservatism. The West is deeply corrupt in its present state, and things can't stand the way they are. The last thing I want is a soothing lullaby that's going to make everyone go back to sleep. The last thing I want is some kind of convincing narrative that brings everyone back to the perception that the right wing is in charge, that Western civilization is going to go back to the way it used to be, or even persist long in the way that it is right now. And that, for the most part, is what people like Jordan Peterson are selling, regardless of the rightness or wrongness of their message. Perhaps the West does need a narrow brush with hell, but that's better than having things just persist as they are right now. A slow, long decline, dying with a whimper and not a bang. To me, the proposition is just fundamentally more depressing. Heck, if that's accelerationism, so be it. But we can't afford complacency anymore.
I agree you might have a more sober analysis than most who prattle on about complacency and the need to accelerate. But it is fundamentally a more cowardly one as well. You know what it will take to truly eliminate your own complacency. But tell me, Dave, have you in your own life? You know what accelerationism ultimately means. You know what the removal of complacency ultimately means, but you lack the courage to confront it. You have failed to take things all the way.
Well, of course I failed at doing that, but so has everyone else. And I don't think that this appeal to individualism, however moral, however spiritual, is going to work. In a lot of ways, I feel like we've done that already. I mean, is there anything worse than just doing this same moral individualism again and again and seeing it fail? I mean, we have to move on. We have to find the larger problem. We have to fight the larger battle. We have to go to something bigger.
That's fairly convenient, Dave. One might even call the perspective self-serving. Collapse is entertaining after all. Not all men want to watch the world burn, but who doesn't like to watch a good dumpster fire? Perhaps that's the reason why you can't stop watching progressive YouTube. Watching a thought slime video probably has the same entertainment factor of watching a car crash in slow motion.
I don't know if it's really like that. I don't think I've ever found disasters or catastrophes entertaining. But there is something oddly comforting about progressive YouTube, perhaps in a pathological way. I grew up around progressivism. It's the status quo. The progressivism I grew up with, though, was comfortable. It was common sense progressivism. Don't be an asshole progressivism. Status quo progressivism. Again, it was comfortable. Everyone liked where we were at. When I moved right, I was looking for something different. I was looking to shake things up. I was questioning the presuppositions that I had been raised with. It was altogether different. But now when I look to the right, I see people who are comfortable. Perhaps that's how it's always been, regardless of the fact that right-wing ideas are more or less more accurate, a better describer of how humanity operates. The people who follow them seem to be comfortable with how things are, or if they're not, they want to find a state to be comfortable in. They're not really seeking any kind of radical change. And I'm not so sure that's the same for the left. They're operating in a different mode, at least in present year. When I watch progressive YouTube, when I read progressive blogs, as bad as they are, as crazy as they are, at least that's not there. The complacency, the comfort, they're post-comfort. They're radical in a real way. And that's refreshing. Don't get me wrong, it's insane. The left is in many ways collapsing into its own narcissism, collapsing into its own mental instability. But at least it can't stay that way. It can't go on forever, and there's something refreshing about that. Every time I watch a progressive YouTube channel and see the insanity and immaturity on display, I think to myself, everyone can see this. The other people can see this. Even the people who are making their videos can see this. They see that it can't go on, that things can't go on as they are right now. And maybe they're going to go insane. Maybe society is going to go insane, but this isn't normal. This is something that needs to be reacted against. And every time I watch progressive YouTube, I think to myself, someone must see this. Someone must be able to wake up, or they must wake up eventually and see just how crazy they've become. Because they can't keep on going on like this. They can't keep disintegrating. And in that collapse, maybe they'll realize the paradox of modernity. Maybe they'll see the struggle we're dealing with. Maybe in that insanity, they'll wake up. They'll come to terms with the true insanity of the modern condition. They'll truly realize the stakes that are at play. They'll realize the war that we're in, not just for one political ideology or the other, but for humanity, for what it means for us to be human.
Well, Dave, I think this makes the diagnosis easier. Perhaps this is less wanting to see the world go to hell in a handbasket. Instead, you are suffering from the everyday Christian affliction of wanting to immanentize the eschaton. You are hoping that there will be a resolution, that the battle of Armageddon will separate out those who are saved from those who seek to deceive. But you know that things are never that easy.
Well, I suppose that might be true. I certainly wouldn't be the first Christian to secretly want that, to secretly want to see things come to a head. We see the chaos, the struggle, the daily toll the chaos takes in our own friends and family, inside our own souls, and it's almost impossible to confront it. You have to struggle against your own inadequacies and face it constantly. And who wouldn't want to replace that struggle with a war, a locked collective battle against a foe that you can actually externalize from yourself? Is that so unusual? Is that wrong?
It is not unusual, but it's also not particularly innocent. What lurks behind the desire to bring forward the final confrontation between good and evil is pride, plain and simple. The desire to control God's own dispensation of justice and time.
But I don't want to command anything, least of all the will of God. I just want things to make sense. I just want the insanity to somehow become manageable. I think I've realized the predicament that we're all in, at least part of it, at least how it exists on the internet today. After doing this for 3 years, after living what amounts to a double life for 3 years, it takes a toll. But more than that, you can see a strange sort of effect playing out. I didn't really realize this until I left Twitter, until I fully took stock about how the internet was affecting me, and how it was accelerating a lot of the forces that modernity was playing out, faster and faster inside my own soul, inside my own sanity. On the one hand, the internet was the way that I could push back politically and collectively against all the pathologies that were existing in real life around me, living in an urban progressive area. The internet was a way of bearing witness to all of this. But at the same time, it was part of the problem. You could feel yourself becoming addicted to the very tools you were using to fight back against the modern condition. You could feel yourself becoming crazier. You could feel yourself getting more wrapped up and more detached as you participated in these very political debates, these very cultural debates on YouTube and Twitter. And it felt at once like there were two paths, two conflicting personalities, two conflicting possibilities that were opening up even inside my own mind. I could take action, I could speak my mind, I could bear witness, I could address the collective problem as it existed online and sometimes in real life. But at the same time, the more I focused on this, I could feel myself detaching, becoming in many ways less holy, less good, less focused on my own internal well-being. And there seemed to be, at once, this unstoppable trade-off. You needed to use the weapons of modernity to fight modernity, to be honest about it, but it was corrupting. You can be as aware as you like about the evils of modernity, about the corrupting influence of consumption and technology, but that doesn't stop you from falling victim to it. That doesn't stop you from backsliding into the same bad habits, into the same corruptive influence that everyone else is currently fighting against. And inside that, what are the options? What can one choose?
A decision between confronting the evil in yourself or in others? That seems like a pretty straightforward decision to me, Dave, at least for a Christian. After all, You talk about the great men of the past like they were innocent lambs who didn't know that the world was evil, the fallen state of man and nature. We all need to be realistic, Dave, but at what level is political realism being used as a tool to conceal moral cowardice, the inability to go all the way, and to make the sacrifices required by the world as Christ did and all the saints after him? There is a bridge between understanding the world, intelligently dealing with it, and still striving for holiness. We just tell ourselves that this can't exist because we lack the courage to face the implications. I am sorry, Dave, but this reality is stark and it requires directness to do it justice.
I understand that there is a calling to give everything, to follow in Christ's footsteps, to die to the world. But there's also a reality, even if that reality is only my own weakness. And the reality is that I manifestly don't live up to that calling. There is a gap between the Christian moral vision and the harsh politics of reality, of the real world, of the modern and postmodern world. And insofar as that gap needs to be bridged, I'm inadequate to the task. I guess you know real honesty. I guess you know a really honest worldview when it keeps on bringing you back to your own inadequacies again and again and again. But that's the full statement. That's the full truth. We all need a bridge, a way to go between the moral vision and the way to actually live in the real world, to participate in the fallen world as it is. I want to be part of that bridge. I want to be a person. I want to be the person who says, I figured it all out. I have the solution, or even a solution, or part of it. But I'm not so sure that's true. I'm not so sure I can say that. Criticism is always easy. You can always point to the other luminaries of the age, the other people who make YouTube videos and point out what they haven't done. But it kind of returns you to the fact that you can't provide what you ultimately want them to, what you feel that they're claiming to provide but can't really live up to. I feel in some ways everyone is waiting for a new vision, someone who can come up with the solution, unifying the moral with the real, coming to a new way to make anything make sense in the present year. No doubt that's what ContraPoints wants to do, that's what Jordan Peterson wants to do, and that's why their fans love them. That's why their fans are going to them. Not really because they have humor or they provide entertainment. We're past that. But in an age where everyone is looking for this grand answer, we have to come to the possibility that no one has it. At least not yet. I certainly don't have the answer. I certainly am not the one to bridge this enormous gap. But you know, the more I think about it, the more I ruminate on this issue, the more the real tragedy is that I could be. I could provide a solution. I could work harder to get a solution. I could work harder in my own life. I could do the difficult thing. I could do the thing that is terrifying. I could rage against the world. I could be more Christ-like. And yet I'm unable to do that. In a very real way, I can't. I can't be the kind of radically honest person my audience needs. I can't be the radically moral person that my family and my society needs. I present myself in whatever way I can online. But at the same time, the image that people are buying, the image that people are clicking on is a false one. I fundamentally betray the medium and the message the second I actually put this out there to be consumed, because I'm presenting myself as a solution in a way that I can never be a solution. And after everything is said and done, I guess I can only ask my audience for one thing: forgiveness. Because I can't give them what they need. I can't give the world, the society we live in, what it needs, what it wants, what it needs me to be. And for that, I'm sorry.